I stacked hay on the Ames Ranch the summer everything you're about to hear happened. And I'm telling it because the internet got the ending right and the beginning all wrong. It started at the feed store dock. Tuesday, 10 in the morning. Half the town in line. Move. Peasant. Some of us have a bloodline to represent. That was Sterling Ames, 24 years old. White sneakers on a loading dock. He didn't wait for anybody to move. He grabbed a 50-pound sack of layer, crumble off the pallet. He turned his hips the way they teach you in a tournament, and he threw it into an old man's chest. The old man was Wendell Harp, 66 years old, 40 years on the Ames place. Wendell had a coffee in one hand and a clipboard in the other. He was writing down a feed order for a horse that wasn't even his. The sack hit him square, right under the collarbone. 50 pounds. Thrown by a black belt. From 3 feet away, and nothing happened. I have to say that twice, because I watched it with my own eyes, and I still had to say it out loud in the parking lot after. Nothing happened. No stagger, no step back, no grunt. The sack stopped against him like it hit a fence post, then slid down his shirt and landed on the boards. His coffee didn't spill. Not one drop. I was 19. I didn't know what I was looking at. All I knew was that his boots moved before the sack did. Both heels turned out, knees soft, hips already down under him. Like the floor had warned him first. Old Mr. Dooley was behind the register with a pen in his hand. He stopped writing. He didn't blink. He said one word. Real quiet, and it wasn't a curse, he said. Brag. I thought it was a brand of feed. I laughed at myself about that later. I don't laugh about it now. Sterling wiped his palms on his shorts like he'd touched something dirty. Scenery doesn't get opinions, he said. Scenery gets moved. Wendell bent down slow, because of his back, and lifted the sack with 2 hands. He set it on the pallet with the label facing out. He set everything with the label facing out. Then he looked at Sterling. 1 second, maybe less. You dropped your manners in the parking lot, son, he said. The whole store went quiet, and not one person in it could have told you why. 91 days later, on the first Saturday of harvest, that same young man screamed that same word at that same old man through a microphone, with the entire county sitting on hay bales in front of him. And every single one of them found out what Mr. Dooley already knew. But before we continue, subscribe now and tell us in the comments where you are watching from and what time you saw this video. Tonight's story is one you will never forget. Here's what I knew about Wendell Harp that morning. Almost nothing. He was the oldest hand on the ranch. He'd been there since before my mother was born. He walked slow and he walked crooked, because 2 of the bones in his lower back were fused into one piece a long time ago. He fed the dog before he fed himself. Every single morning, an old blue heeler named Junie with a milky eye and a bad hip. He didn't drink. He didn't cuss. He didn't tell stories about himself. He had hands like tack leather and a grip he never used on anybody. That's the man everybody saw. Here's what nobody on that ranch saw. And I'm giving it to you now, because you deserve to know what Sterling Ames was standing in front of that whole summer while he ran his mouth. Before the 40 years of fence line and feed and calving in the dark, Wendell Harp spent 10 years at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Not as a soldier. As a civilian combatives cadre. You want that in plain words. 10 years, 5 days a week. The Army paid that man to teach hand-to-hand fighting to the men trying to become Green Berets. He didn't compete. He didn't have trophies. There was no scoreboard. He had a mat, a whistle he barely used, and a line of the toughest young men this country produces, and his job was to put them on their backs until they understood why. Mr. Dooley knew because Mr. Dooley's nephew went through that course in 1998 and came home and said one sentence about it at Thanksgiving. There's an old boy down there who never raises his voice, and everybody's scared of him. That's the gap. Hold on to it. Sterling Ames saw a slow old farmhand with a coffee. He was standing 3 feet from a man who taught Special Forces candidates how to end a fight before it got loud. Now let me tell you how Sterling got there in the first place. He was Mr. Ames's nephew. Mr. Ames owned the ranch, the 2 feedlots, and about 900 acres of the prettiest bottom ground in the county. He lived in the city, and he was never on the property. He was a voice on a speakerphone and a signature on a check. Sterling came out in May in a truck nobody on the crew could afford, with a gym bag in the back and no work boots at all. He was a Judo black belt. That part was true. He had a wall of pictures on his phone to prove it. Medals, mats, a coach with his arm around him. The crew asked what he was doing there. He told us he was taking a season away from competition. That was a lie. And it was a bigger lie than any of us guessed. Sit tight on that. The first thing he did was shake hands with everybody. Except he didn't shake hands. He took your hand and turned it. He took your sleeve at the wrist and rolled the fabric between his fingers, testing it, feeling how you'd fall if he wanted you to. He did it to me. He did it to Deke Ottinger, who's 20 and built like a gatepost. He did it to Marisol Vega, who's 22 and runs the calving records better than any office in the county. Grips, he said, grinning. You people wouldn't understand. Then he got to Wendell. Wendell put out his hand flat, palm down, the way you offer it to a horse. Not a fist, not a grip, just a flat old hand hanging in the air. Sterling looked at it and laughed and didn't take it. I'll pass, he said. I don't want to break anything antique. Deke laughed because he was nervous. I didn't laugh. Marisol looked at the ground. Wendell put his hand back in his pocket and went to check the water in the north tank. And that was the first hour of the worst summer of my life. By the end of that first week, Sterling had a name for the crew. He called us the scenery, not behind our backs, to our faces, over the radio, in the barn, at the lunch table. Somebody get the scenery to move that trailer. Tell the scenery I need the gator by 4. Marisol asked him once, real politely, to call her by her name. He said, Names are for people who are going to be here next year. She didn't understand what he meant by that. Nobody did. I want you to remember he said it in June, because it turns into a knife in August. The second week, he made the crew his dojo. That's the only word for it. He'd walk up behind you while you were carrying something and grab your sleeve and your collar and say, "Base, show me your base." Then he'd pull. Deke went down first, in gravel, with a hay hook in his hand. He could have opened himself up from wrist to elbow. Sterling stood over him and said, "That's a hip throw." "You're welcome." Deke got up and said thank you. "That's the part that still eats at me." Deke said thank you, because Sterling was the owner's blood, and Deke sends money home every Friday. Then Sterling did it to Cody Pruitt. Cody was 18, first summer, skinny as a whip, working the picking crew for gas money before school started. He was polite to everybody, including the cattle. Sterling caught him in the equipment yard in front of 6 people, took the collar of his shirt, dropped his hips, and put that kid into the dirt flat on his shoulder blades. It made a sound, like a rug beaten with a stick. Cody didn't get up for a second. He just lay there and blinked at the sky. "Farm strength," Sterling said, and stepped over him. "Farm strength is a myth. Real training is a science." He said it to us, like a teacher. Then he told Cody to hurry up, because the peaches don't pick themselves. Now, here's the first thing you need to know about how that summer worked. Every time Sterling did something ugly, the ranch paid for it inside of about 3 days. Every time. I kept count without meaning to. Cody Pruitt's last name is on a sign in town. Pruitt Large Animal Veterinary. His father is the only vet in a 40-mile circle who'll come out at 2 in the morning for a bad calving. Cody didn't complain to him. Cody wouldn't. But 6 people saw it, and this is a county, not a city. And by Thursday, Doc Pruitt knew. He didn't call the ranch. He didn't yell at anybody. He just adjusted his fee schedule for one address. Our call-out rate doubled that Friday. Doubled. In writing, on the invoice, no explanation given and none needed. The bookkeeper called Sterling about it, and I was in the office pulling gloves out of the supply bin. He said, "That's a mistake." "Call him back and tell him that's a mistake," she said. I did. He said, "It isn't." Sterling stood there with his jaw going sideways. Then he said the thing that told me exactly who he was. He said, "Well, then he can wait for his money like the rest of the scenery." And Wendell Harp was standing in the doorway with a bucket, listening to every word, and Wendell said nothing at all. I want to be honest with you here, because I promised the beginning straight. That summer, I got mad at Wendell almost as often as I got mad at Sterling. He never said anything. He never stepped in. He'd watch a kid get dumped in the gravel and then go top off the dog's water. I asked him about it the night after Cody got thrown. We were latching the calf gate. I said, "You saw that?" He said, "I did." I said, "You're not going to say anything?" He looked out at the dark for a while. Then he said, "The land settles all its accounts, Toby. It just doesn't settle them on your schedule." I said, "That's not an answer." He said, "No, it's a fact. It's got a bad habit of not being an answer, too." And then he said goodnight and walked to the bunkhouse at that slow, crooked pace of his. And I stood there at the gate absolutely furious at a 66-year-old man who had done nothing wrong. Hold that feeling. You're supposed to have it. I did. It took me until the last week of August to find out what he was actually doing with all that quiet And when I found out, I sat down in the grass. The video went up on a Tuesday. Sterling filmed Wendell walking. That's it. That's the whole video. 40 seconds of an old man crossing the yard with 2 feed buckets, filmed from behind, from the shade of the equipment barn, with Sterling narrating in a whisper like it was a nature program. "Observe the native," he whispered. "Top speed 1 mile per hour. Do not startle him." He put it up with a caption. 3 words and a laughing face. He showed it to us at lunch. He held the phone up and turned it around the table so everybody got a look. Marisol put her fork down and left. Deke laughed once and hated himself. I said, "Man, his back is fused." Sterling said, "Then he should retire, shouldn't he?" And he smiled at me with real warmth, like we were friends. Like I'd fed him a line he'd been waiting on. That video got about 9,000 views in 2 days, which for a county like ours is the whole world. Then the comments turned. Not all of them. Most people just laughed, because most people are asleep. But somebody shared it into a page for Fort Bragg alumni. I still don't know who. Mr. Dooley has a nephew, and Mr. Dooley has a computer, and I've never asked him a direct question about it. The top comment on that video, 71 likes, from an account with a unit patch for a profile picture, was 1 word, careful. That's it, 1 word and a period. Sterling read it out loud at the table in a goofy voice. Then he blocked the account and put his phone face down, and I watched him do something I'd never seen him do. He looked out the window at the yard for maybe 4 seconds, checking to see where Wendell was. He laughed after, but he looked first. That night, I asked Wendell if he'd seen the video. He was sitting on the bunkhouse steps with Junie's head on his boot, filling her water bowl from a jug, even though the spigot was 10 feet away, because the spigot water came out warm in August, and he wouldn't give her warm water. He said, "I don't have the internet, Toby." I said, "He's making fun of how you walk." Wendell scratched the dog's ear. "That's fair. I walk funny." I said, "It's not funny. It's your spine." He said, "It's both." Then he did something small that I filed away without understanding it. He set the jug down on the step. It tipped. It started to go over the edge, and it was going to spill 4 gallons on the boards, and neither of us was close enough. His hand was on it before it moved an inch. I didn't see him reach. I want to be clear about that. I was looking right at him, and I did not see his arm travel. There was a jug falling, and then there was a jug not falling, and his shoulder hadn't shifted an inch. He set it upright, kept talking about the dog's hip. I said, "How did you do that?" He said, "Do what?" I said, "Nothing." There's a thing I've learned since that summer, and I'll hand it to you for free. Watch old men's hands, not their faces. The face lies. The hands were trained by somebody. By the middle of July, Sterling ran the crew. Nobody announced it. There was no meeting. Our foreman, a decent, tired man named Rusty Pell, took a leave of absence the 2nd week of July and never came back. And I found out 3 weeks later he'd been offered 6 months' pay to go. So the clipboard went to Sterling. 24 years old, 4 weeks of ranch experience. And the last name on the mailbox And that's when the hours started disappearing. It was little at first. It always is. Wendell's Tuesday came back as 6 hours instead of 9. The two other old hands, Bill Teague and a quiet man everybody called Poke, went from full weeks to 4 days. Marisol caught it in the payroll file. She showed me on the screen. She said, "Look at whose hours got cut." I looked. Every man on that list was over 55. Every single one, she said. "That's not a mistake, Toby. A mistake is random." Sterling had an answer ready when Bill Teague asked him. He'd clearly practiced it in a mirror. He said, "We're moving to a performance model. You're being paid for output. If your output takes you 9 hours, that's a you problem." Bill Teague is 59 and has worked that ground since he was 17, and he stood there holding his hat and said, "Yes, sir." I want to scream about that sentence even now. Yes, sir. The crew came to Wendell that Friday. All of us, out behind the machine shed where the radio didn't reach. Deke said, "You've been here 40 years. He'll listen to you." Poke said, "Just talk to him, Wendell." Marisol said, "Or talk to Mr. Ames. You knew his father." And Wendell Harp listened to all of it and nodded at all of it. And then he said, "I'll think on it." Then he walked over and filled the dog's water bowl. Deke swore and walked off. Marisol went to her truck. Poke just stood there, and I said something I'm ashamed of, which is why I'm putting it in. I said, "You're a coward." I said it to his back, loud enough to be heard, in front of 4 people. He stopped. He didn't turn around. He said, "All right." That's what he said. All right. Then he went and finished the water, and the dog drank, and the sun went down. 2 hours later, he knocked on the door of the bunk room where Deke and I sleep. And he had a clipboard and 2 pencils. He said, "Toby, you know how to weld?" I said, "No." He said, "Then that's Tuesday 6 a.m. I said, "Why?" He said, "Because a man who can weld eats." I thought he was changing the subject to avoid the fight. I thought he was an old man hiding in chores. Understand what I was actually looking at. I'll say it plain and then I'll prove it later. That was a man opening a course roster. Because the same week, he had Marisol in the office 2 nights running, teaching her the whole calving ledger, the tax pages, the vaccine schedule, the way you talk to a bank. He had Deke on the tractor learning hydraulics, with the manual open on the fender. He had Poke's grandson learning to read a hoof. He had Cody Pruitt, of all people, learning to run a chute so calm the cattle didn't fight it. He never once told us why. He just filled every empty hour we had with a skill that walks off a property with you, and I called that man a coward to his face in July. Now, the county judo exhibition, 2nd Saturday in August. This is where the summer stopped being a bad job and turned into a countdown. The high school gym, 2 mats, folding chairs, 400 people, a raffle, a sponsor banner from the tractor dealership. Sterling headlined it. Of course he did. He came out in a white gi with his belt tied so the ends hung dead even, and he waved at the crowd with both hands like a man who'd rehearsed waving. They gave him a man to fight. Big fellow, 30-ish, out of a gym 2 counties over, Dane Crowder. It lasted 11 seconds. Sterling took a grip, stepped in. and Crowder went up and over and landed flat and stayed down. The gym came apart. People stood up. A little kid in the front row screamed like it was fireworks. I sat there and clapped like an idiot with everybody else. Because when 400 people stand up, your hands just go. Then Sterling took the microphone. He didn't have to. Nobody handed it to him. He walked to the scorer's table and picked it up. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you. I want to say something about where I've been this summer." And the gym got quiet for him. "I've been out on my family's ranch," he said, "working with the local men." He let that word sit. Local. He said it the way you'd say wet. And I've heard a lot about farm strength out there. A lot of talk about how hard work beats real training. Somebody in the crowd laughed. Somebody always does. "So at the Harvest Festival next month," Sterling said, "I'm going to put on a little demonstration. Farm strength versus actual technique. Educational. For the kids." Then he grinned into the microphone and delivered the line that put 400 people in the exact seat he wanted them in. "I'll even use the scenery." And the county laughed. "That's the part I need you to sit with." The county laughed. My neighbors. Women who taught me in Sunday school. Men who'd bought hay off Wendell Harp for 20 years. They laughed because they didn't know who he meant. Mr. Dooley knew. He was in row 6 with his hat in his lap, and he didn't laugh at all. I found Wendell that night by the calf shed. He'd worked the whole exhibition day, obviously. "Somebody had to," I said. "He called you out." "In front of the whole county." Wendell said, "I heard." I said, "You're not going to do it." And he looked at me and he said the strangest thing anyone said to me all summer. He said, "Toby, when a young man announces the time and place, that's not a threat. That's a gift." I said, "What does that mean?" He said, "It means I know where he'll be." Then he went in the shed to check a heifer that was 2 days out. And I stood in the dark with my heart going like a rabbit. And I still had no idea that the fight wasn't the story. The fight was the distraction. The real thing was already 3 months deep and sitting in a folder on the ranch office desk. And I found it 11 days later while I was doing the single most boring job on the property. Timesheets. Every other Wednesday, somebody has to carry the paper timesheets from the shop to the ranch office and put them in the tray. That's it. That's the job. It takes 4 minutes, and it's the only time a hand ever goes in that building. August 21st. About 1 in the afternoon. Hot enough that the flies had given up. The office door was open 2 inches because the air conditioner window unit makes the door swell. And Sterling was inside with the speakerphone on. And he was talking to his uncle. I stopped in the hall with a stack of paper in my hands. "I'm going to give you what I heard, the way I heard it. Because I've said it under oath since, and I've said it to a room full of people, and it comes out the same every time." The uncle's voice, thin through the speaker, said, "Where are we on the crew?" Sterling said, 3 down. Pell's gone, obviously. The Teague guy is close. He's been asking about his hours twice a week. The uncle said, "And the old one?" Sterling said, "Harp." The uncle said, "That's the one. He's the anchor. As long as he's out there, they'll all sit tight. And then he said the sentence that turned that whole summer inside out for me. He said, "Sterling, listen to me. Antler Ridge won't close on a working ranch. They want the ground clean. They want a lodge and a road and a gate. They are not buying my payroll, and they are not buying 9 men with 40 years of loyalty and no contracts. If those men quit, they quit. If I fire them, I'm writing severance and I'm defending a wage claim from a bunch of old boys with a lawyer cousin. So they quit. On their own. Voluntary." Sterling said, "I know." The uncle said, "Then make it unpleasant. You're good at that." He laughed when he said it. Both of them laughed. I want to be precise about what I felt standing in that hallway because it wasn't rage. Rage came later, in the truck. What I felt was cold. Because every single thing that had happened since May reorganized itself in about 2 seconds. The grip tests, the gravel, the video of an old man's crooked walk, the hours, the word scenery. It was never a spoiled kid being a jerk on his uncle's ranch. It was a job. It had a purpose and a timeline and a payout. He wasn't bullying us. He was evicting us, and he was doing it in a way that wouldn't cost his families $1 or 1 lawsuit. And the reason he did it so loudly in front of so many people was that public humiliation makes men quit faster than pay cuts do. Sterling Ames wasn't the villain of a story about a mean rich boy. He was a tool being paid by the week, and he was enjoying his work. Then his uncle asked one more question, and I heard the answer through a 2-inch gap, and I nearly dropped 40 timesheets on the floor. He said, "What's your timeline?" Sterling said, "Harvest Festival, I've got something planned. After that, I promise you. The old man walks off that property on his own, and the rest follow him out the gate. I put the timesheets in the tray. I don't know how. My hands did it. Then I walked out into that white heat and got in my truck and sat there with the door open and my boots in the dirt for a long time. And here's the thing I did next. And it's the only smart thing I did all summer. I went back that night and I photographed the folder. It was right there on the desk. Antler Ridge Outdoor Holdings. A letter of intent, a hand-drawn map of the property with the bunkhouse and the calving barn crossed out, and the word Low G written over the top in ballpoint, and a page of talking points in Sterling's own handwriting. I'm not going to read you all of it. I'll read you 3 lines. Target the seniors first. They anchor the rest. Public-private. They quit faster when the town watches. No paper. Nothing in writing to any employee. He wrote that down, in his own hand, in a folder on a desk, in a building with a broken lock. I had it all on my phone by 10 o'clock that night, and I sat in the bunk room shaking, and I decided I was going to be the one to save everybody. I went to Wendell first. He was where he always was after dark, on the step with the dog, filling that bowl from a jug. I said, "Wendell, I have to tell you something, and it's bad." He said, "All right," I said, "the ranch is being sold to a hunting outfit, and Sterling's whole job out here, all of it, the throws, the videos, the hours, his whole job is to make you quit so they don't have to pay you anything." I was breathing hard. I'd run some of the way. And Wendell Harp reached over and scratched Junie behind the ear and said, "I know." I said, "What?" He said, "I've known since the second week of June." I sat down on the step. I actually sat down, right where I was. I said, "How?" He said, "Stakes." I said, "What?" He said, "Surveyor's stakes. Down along the creek and up the west line. Pink ribbon. Whoever set them wasn't running a fence line, Toby. They were running a road." He said it the way you'd say, "It looks like rain." I said, "You've known for 2 months." He said, "About that." And everything in me came up at once. I said, "Then why didn't you tell anybody?" "Deke's sending money to his mom. Poke is 61. Bill's been here since he was 17. You let them think they were bad at their jobs. You let them think it was their fault their hours got cut. You let that kid apologize for getting thrown in the gravel." I was shouting at a 66-year-old man on a step in the dark. I'm not proud of it. I'm also not going to pretend it didn't happen. And Wendell Harp let me finish. He always lets you finish. I understand now that's a habit you learn from teaching young men who are angry and scared, which is the only kind of young men the Army ever sent him. Then he said, "What would they have done with it, son?" I said, "Fought it." He said, "With what?" I opened my mouth and nothing came out. He said, "It's his ground. It's his name on it. It's his to sell. There's no court in this state going to tell a man he can't sell his own dirt." He nodded out at the dark. "So they can't win the ranch. Then the only question left is what they walk out with." I said, "Nothing. They walk out with nothing. That's the whole point of what he's doing." And Wendell said, "That's what I've been working on." Then he told me, and this is the part where I sat in the grass, he said, "Marisol can run a herd book and a bank now. She couldn't in May. Deke can pull a hydraulic pump and put it back. Polk's boy can read a hoof. Cody Pruitt can move 40 head through a chute without one of them bruising. And I'll tell his daddy that myself. And you're going to be able to weld by October, which means you'll never be broke in a county like this one." I said, "You've been teaching us." He said, "Every night since June the 9th. I said, "Why didn't you say what it was for?" And he said, "Because a man learns different when he's learning for the future than when he's learning because he's about to get thrown out. Fear teaches fast, and it teaches shallow. I've got no use for it." He said it plain. No weight on it, like a man telling you the right way to store a rope. And I sat in the grass beside that step and put my head in my hands, because 5 weeks earlier I had called that man a coward in front of 4 people, and I had been so completely wrong that I couldn't find the bottom of it. I said, "I'm sorry about what I said." He said, "I know you are." I said, "You didn't say anything back." He said, "You weren't wrong to be angry, Toby. You just had the address wrong." Then he stood up, and it took him a while because of his back, and he said, 6 a.m. Bring the good gloves. We're doing lap joints." He'd known about the sale for 2.5 months, and he'd said nothing. I've turned that over about 1,000 times since. I still don't know if he was right. I'll ask you about it at the end, and I want you to actually answer, because I've never been able to. Here's what I do know. From that night, I stopped watching Sterling and started watching Wendell. And once you start doing that, you can't stop noticing things. Like the way he stood in a room, always with his back to a wall and his hip toward the door, every single time, in the barn, in the shop, in the diner in town. I started testing it. I never caught him once with his back to an open room, like his pulse. I saw it in his throat the day a bull got loose in the working pens and put Deke on the top rail. Everybody's heart was hammering. Wendell walked the fence line with a gate rope, and I was close enough to see the vein in his neck, and it was slow. Not calm looking. Slow, like a man in a chair, like the word he used when he was tired. He came in one night after a long day, fixing a washed-out culvert, and I asked how bad it was. And he said, "Eight's up. Whole draw's 8 up," I said. "Eight's up?" He caught himself. Just a flicker. Then he said, "It's a term." I said, "Where from?" He said, "Where I used to work." And he went to wash his hands. Now let me give you the good part of August, because there was one, and it came in 3 pieces, and every one of them was Sterling Ames's own doing. The land settles its accounts. It doesn't do it on your schedule. But that August, it started doing it early. Piece 1 came in an envelope. Sterling had cut hours off 11 people by then. He was careful about it, or he thought he was. He picked men who wouldn't fight. Old men, quiet men, men with a reason to keep their heads down. He also cut Marisol Vega, because she'd corrected him twice in front of the crew about vaccine dates, and he didn't care for that. 2 hours off her week, $68. That's the number that broke the whole thing, because Marisol Vega's mother has sat on the county labor board for 9 years. He didn't know. How would he? He never asked anybody a question about themselves all summer. He didn't know Marisol's mother's name. He didn't know Marisol's last name until he had to sign her check. She didn't even complain to her mother. She mentioned it at Sunday dinner the way you mention weather. The letter came to the ranch on a Wednesday. Certified. Signature required, and the only person there to sign was me. It was addressed to Mr. Ames personally, not to the ranch, not to the LLC. To him, at his home address in the city, with a copy to the property. Notice of preliminary wage inquiry. Request for 18 months of payroll records. Request for written documentation of any change to scheduled hours, including the business justification for each. In writing. Every reduction. Justified in writing. The exact thing his own talking points said to never, ever create. Sterling opened it in the office, and I watched his ears go red before his face did. He said, "This is nothing." The bookkeeper said, "It's certified, Sterling." He said, "It's nothing." He threw the envelope in the trash. Then, about 4 minutes later, he took it back out of the trash, flattened it on the desk, and put it in the folder. That's the moment I knew he was scared. Not when he shouted. When he went back for the envelope. Piece 2 walked onto the property in boots that had never been dirty. Garrett Pool. Antler Ridge Outdoor Holdings. He was supposed to come in October, after the season, after the crew was gone and the place was quiet and empty and ready to be photographed. He came September 4th, unannounced. which is what buyers do when they've heard something. Sterling nearly tripped, getting out to the truck to meet him. And Garrett Poole spent 4 hours on that property, and I was on the fence crew that day. And I want to tell you exactly what he saw, because he saw all of it. He saw Bill Teague get told to move a trailer and say, "Yes, sir," in a voice like a coffin lid. He saw Deke Ottinger get grabbed by the sleeve in the equipment yard and set down in the dirt for a demonstration because Sterling could not help himself, not even in front of the buyer, especially not in front of the buyer. He saw Deke get up with grass on his back and look at the visitor with an expression I hope I never have to wear. He saw a crew that stopped talking whenever the foreman walked past. And at the end of it, he saw Wendell Harp come out of the calving barn with his sleeves rolled and blood on his forearm from a hard pull and hand a wet newborn calf off to Cody Pruitt and say 4 words to that kid. Good, dry the ears. Garrett Poole watched that whole thing with his hands in his pockets. Then he asked Sterling a question I heard from 20 feet away because sound carries in a yard. He said, "How much of the labor stays after close?" Sterling said, "None. That's the beauty of it." And Garrett Poole said, "Huh. That's all, huh?" The revised letter came 9 days later. Marisol saw it, because Marisol saw everything that came through that office by then, and Wendell had made sure of that in June. Antler Ridge reduced their offer, in writing, $2.4 million under the letter of intent. They gave 2 reasons, and I've got them memorized. Elevated reputational risk associated with current property management, anticipated regional labor, and vendor friction, which is the polite way of saying, your nephew has made your ranch famous in the wrong direction, and nobody in that county will haul, vet, or fence for you. The uncle called that night, speakerphone off this time. Sterling took it outside by the propane tank and walked in circles for 40 minutes, and the only words anybody caught were "not my fault" and "the old man." Piece 3 had a name, Dane Crowder, the big fellow who went up and over in 11 seconds at the county exhibition, in front of 400 people, under a tractor dealership banner. He was paid to lose. $400, agreed by text message to come in from 2 counties over and take 1 clean throw and stay down. I know it was 400 because Dane Crowder posted the text messages himself on a Saturday afternoon in September after he didn't get paid. He waited 5 weeks for that money. He called twice. He got sent to voicemail twice. Then he got a text back that read, and I'm quoting it exactly because it went around this county like a grass fire. Consider the exposure your payment. Dane Crowder had a wife and a bad transmission and no sense of humor about that sentence. So he posted the screenshots, the offer, the price, the instruction, in Sterling's own words, to make it look real, but go over on the first grip. 400 people had stood up and screamed for 11 seconds of theater, and now every one of them had a phone in their hand reading how much it cost. The County Judo Association pulled the exhibition result inside a week. No press release. They just quietly took his name off the board and stopped answering his emails. And here's the piece of that I love the most, and I'm allowed to love it. because I was there for the rest. Dane Crowder ended his post with a line that had nothing to do with money. He wrote, "I've been in the sport 18 years. I let a man throw me for $400 and he still went and got on a microphone and called a bunch of working men scenery. That's the part I can't get past." Sterling read that in the shop with about 6 of us standing there. He laughed. He did the laugh he always did. Then he crushed the paper coffee cup in his fist, and coffee went all down his wrist and onto his shoe. And he stood there with his hand shaking and coffee dripping off his knuckles, and nobody said one word. Deke Ottinger looked at the floor to keep from smiling and did not entirely manage it. That was the first time I ever saw Sterling Ames get laughed at by a man on his own payroll, and he saw it too, and something behind his eyes changed the shape it was. After that, he got worse. I want to be honest about that, because people always want the karma to be tidy, and it isn't. Cornered men get meaner before they get finished. He put a notice on the bunkhouse door. Occupancy under review, effective October 1st. That's Wendell's home. Has been for 26 years, since his wife died and he sold their place in town. 1 room, a hot plate, a dog dish by the step. Sterling put a printed piece of paper on that door with a thumbtack and walked away, whistling. Wendell read it, took it down, folded it in half, put it in his shirt pocket. Then he filled the dog's bowl. I said, "That's your house," he said. "It's a room, Toby," I said. "It's 26 years. And Wendell Harp said, "Yes, it is." And that was all he said about it, and his jaw was doing something on the left side that I'd never seen it do. Then came the last week before Harvest Festival, and Sterling started advertising. He put up flyers, actual flyers at the feed store, at the diner, at the co-op. Harvest Festival Exhibition. Farm Strength vs. Real Training, 2 p.m., South and Neve. Family friendly. He hung one at Dooley's register. And Mr. Dooley let it hang there for 3 days without a word. And on the 4th day, he called Wendell's bunkhouse phone, which almost nobody has the number to. I was there. I heard Wendell's side of it. Wendell said, "Hello, Vernon." Then a long time of nothing. Then Wendell said, "I know it." Then more nothing. Then he said, "No, I'm not going to do that." And then, at the end, he said something with a little bit of a smile in it, which was rare. He said, "Vernon, if he lays a hand on me in front of the whole county, that's not my doing. That's just Saturday." He hung up and looked at me and said, "Don't repeat that." I've repeated it maybe 400 times since. I figure the statutes run out. The night before the festival, Wendell had me and Marisol and Deke and Cody Pruitt in the shop until 11 o'clock. Not to plan anything. I want to be extremely clear. There was no plan. He had us doing inventory, serial numbers on every implement, photographs of every tractor's hour meter, copies of the vaccine log, the herd book, the fuel records, the maintenance receipts, all of it scanned onto a laptop and mailed to Marisol's own email address at 10:47 p.m. Deke said, "Wendell, what is this for?" And Wendell said, "So that when somebody says this place ran itself, there's paper that says who ran it." Then he sent us to bed. He said, "Big day tomorrow. Eat breakfast." And I said, "Are you going to do it? Are you going out there?" He was wiping down a wrench. He didn't look up. He said, "I'm going to have my coffee, Toby, same as every Saturday." Which was not an answer. And was also, I understand now, the most complete answer he could have given me. The Harvest Festival is the biggest day this county has. Everybody comes. There's no exaggeration in that sentence. The churches come, the school comes, the co-op comes. The volunteer fire department parks the pumper by the gate and lets kids climb it. They set it in the south field every year. Hay bales stacked too high for bleachers, 3 deep on all 4 sides, a flatbed trailer for a stage, kettle corn, a pie table, a bounce house, 200 trucks in the cut hay. That year, somebody had roped off a square of grass in the middle, 40 feet on a side, with orange baling twine and 4 T-posts. They'd put a banner up, Sterling paid for it. Farm Strength VS. Real training. At 1 o'clock, the bleachers were full. I counted 600 people, and then quit counting. Garrett Poole from Antler Ridge was there. In a folding chair somebody had brought out for him, with a folder in his lap. He'd flown in for it. He wanted to see the ranch on its biggest day. Mr. Dooley was in the second row, center, hat in his lap, not talking to anybody. Doc Pruitt was there. Marisol's mother was there. Dane Crowder drove 2 counties over and stood at the back with his arms crossed, which I have never once asked him to explain. And Wendell Harp was working. That's what he was doing at 2 o'clock in the afternoon at the biggest gathering of the year. He was on the far side of the field with a rake and a wheelbarrow, cleaning up after the stock parade, because somebody has to, and because that is the job, and because nobody had told him not to. He had a paper cup of coffee balanced on the wheelbarrow rail. Sterling took the microphone at 10 after 2. He was in his gi at a harvest festival, in a hayfield, bare feet in the cut grass, belt hanging even, and he'd tanned for it. "Afternoon, everybody," he said. "Thank you for coming out." Polite clapping. The polite kind, where the hands don't really meet. "Now, I promised you a demonstration," he said, "and I keep my promises." He walked the inside of that twine square with the microphone like a man on television. "There's an idea in this county," he said. "That hard work makes you tough. That because a man's been lifting bales for 40 years, he's somehow equal to a person with real training. And I love this county, I do. But that idea is a lie. And it's a dangerous lie. And today we're going to educate everybody about it. For the kids." He pointed the microphone across the field, and 600 heads turned. Wendell Harp had a rake in his hands and a wheelbarrow full of what you'd expect, and no idea he was in a spotlight. "Move, Peasant!" Sterling shouted into the microphone. "Some of us have a bloodline to represent." The speakers were rented, and they were far too loud. That line went across the whole south field, over the bounce house, over the pie table, out into the parked trucks. And then he laughed into the microphone so everybody could hear him laugh. "That's a joke," he said. Mostly. A few people laughed. Most didn't. I watched it move through those bleachers like wind through a wheat field. 600 people getting uncomfortable at slightly different speeds. Come on out here. Old-timer, Sterling said. You've been the scenery all summer. Let's make you useful. There is a specific sound a crowd makes when it wants to stop something and doesn't know how. It's not a boo. It's lower than that. It's 600 people all shifting their weight on hay bales at once. Wendell stood there for a moment. Then he set the rake against the wheelbarrow. Handle up. Tines in, the way you're supposed to. He walked across that field, slow and crooked, the whole distance, in front of everybody. And it took a while. And the microphone made noises about it the entire time. There he is. Give him a hand. He'll need the extra time. Wendell stepped over the twine into the square. He was in work clothes, boots, canvas pants, a shirt with the ranch's name on the pocket. He had his paper coffee cup in his left hand. He'd carried it the whole way. He looked around the square once, at the crowd, at the posts, at the ground, and I understand that look now. He was reading the footing. Then he said, at ordinary volume, not into any microphone, "Son, don't do this in front of your family." Sterling put the mic to his mouth. What was that? Speak up for the crowd, Wendell said. I said I'm not going to fight you. I'll shake your hand and we'll both go eat pie. 600 people heard the second half of that, and about 40 people clapped, and it was starting to turn. Sterling felt it turn. That's what did it. He said, "That's the problem with you people, all that talk. And when it's time, you fold." Wendell said, "That's right." He said it easy. He agreed with him. "I fold," he said. "Now, let me go finish my work." And he turned to step back over the twine. That is the fact I need you to hold, and I've held it under oath twice. Wendell Harp turned around and moved toward the rope to leave. Sterling came in behind him. He took a competition grip. Right hand on the collar, high, behind the neck, left hand on the sleeve at the elbow. A tournament grip on a man twice his age with a fused spine, from behind, in front of a bounce house full of children. Somebody screamed, actually screamed. It was Marisol's mother. And here's where the summer took 1 second and turned itself upside down. And I've had 4 years and a lot of quiet nights to figure out how to explain it. And this is the best I can do. Sterling pulled. Wendell's shoulder wasn't there. That's all. His shoulder rolled down and forward, maybe 2 inches. And the collar grip that was supposed to be against a spine was suddenly against nothing but loose fabric and air. Sterling stepped in for the throw anyway. He'd committed. His hip drove in to load the old man across it, and the hip he was reaching for was not where hips go. Wendell had turned about 8 degrees. Not a leap, not a spin. 8 degrees, and his weight settled down into his heels, and his center went somewhere under him that Sterling could not get an arm around. Sterling's own force had nowhere to land. He went past, off the end of his own pull. His bare feet crossed each other in the cut grass, and he hit the ground on his side with a sound like a dropped saddle. The whole field made one noise. 600 people, 1 syllable. Wendell hadn't moved his feet. I was 30 feet away, and I'm telling you his boots were where they started. He still had the coffee. Sterling came up fast. His face had gone a color I'd never seen on him. That was a slip, he said. not into the mic, and everybody heard it anyway. Wendell said, "It was." Sterling came again. This time he was serious. No showmanship. He dropped his level and drove for a double grip, hard, the way he'd taken Dane Crowder in 11 seconds under the tractor banner. And Wendell shrugged. I want that word to land, because that's what it was, a shrug. The elbow came up 2 inches, the shoulder rolled, and the grip slid off him like a hand sliding off a wet fence rail. Then Wendell's forearm was across Sterling's chest, not pushing, just there. And his hip was turned an inch inside of Sterling's hip, and all that forward speed Sterling brought with him went straight down into the ground. He landed on his back, flat, both shoulder blades. Air came out of him in one loud, honest sound. That's the sound 600 people never forgot. There were grown men in those bleachers, half out of their seats, with their hands on their knees. A woman 2 rows over from me said, "Oh, my Lord." Somebody's phone hit the hay bales and nobody picked it up. Wendell stepped back. He gave him the space. He didn't stand over him, and he didn't say anything. He took a sip of his coffee. The 3rd time was the worst, and I hate that Sterling did it, and I understand exactly why he did. Because he had a folder full of a plan, and a buyer in a folding chair, and an uncle waiting on a phone call, and his entire year and his entire idea of himself were sitting on their backs in the grass in front of the whole county. So he came in ugly. No technique in it at all. Shoulders first, both hands up, straight at an old man's chest, and Wendell Harp caught his wrist. That's it, one hand. Right wrist from underneath. Thumb across the back of it. Then he turned it, maybe a 1/4 inch, and stepped his own foot to the outside. And Sterling's shoulder followed his wrist. And his hips followed his shoulder, and his feet followed his hips. And he was face down in the cut hay with his arm laid flat, and his own weight holding him there. Wendell knelt. Slowly, because of his back, he put one knee down, kept the wrist flat, and there was no strain on his face at all. Sterling's legs were kicking. His toes were digging up dirt. Wendell's chest wasn't even moving fast. I was close enough to see the vein in his neck, and it was slow. It was the same slow it had been on the fence line with a loose bull. And Wendell Harp leaned down and said the thing that ended. That summer at Conversation Volume, with the live microphone lying in the grass 18 inches from his mouth, he said, "Brag, son, 10 years. Your instructors called me, sir." The field went absolutely silent. I mean the kettle corn machine, the generator, 600 people, the wind. Silent. Sterling made a sound into the ground. Half a word, half a groan. Wendell said, "You can start with ouch." Deke Ottinger told me later he had to sit down on a hay bale. He said his legs quit. Sterling said something else nobody caught. Wendell said, "Say it again." Sterling said, "I'm done." And Wendell let go instantly, immediately. Before the second syllable was finished, he took his hand off that wrist like it had gotten hot, and he stood up, and he stepped 2 full paces back, and he put his hands where everybody could see them. He did not stand over him. He did not point. He did not say one word to the crowd. He waited until Sterling had gotten his hands under himself. Then he said, Get up slow. You'll be dizzy. And he offered his hand, palm down, flat. The same hand he'd offered on the first day of May, the one that got laughed at. Sterling didn't take it. He got up on his own with grass in his belt, breathing like a man who'd run a mile. And that's when Wendell Harp handed the whole thing back to him, in front of 600 people, in 11 words. He said, "The peasants standing, son, the bloodlines sitting in the grass. The bleachers came apart. Now here's what happened in the next 9 minutes. Because the fight wasn't the payoff. The fight was just the part that got everybody's attention." Wendell picked his coffee cup up off the grass and went back across the field to his wheelbarrow. That was it. That was his entire celebration. He went back to the rake, and I stepped over the twine with a stack of paper in my hands. I'd carried it in my truck for 3 weeks. Photocopies. 40 of them. Marisol had made them at the library. I picked up the microphone off the ground. I was 19 years old, and I had never spoken to more than 8 people at once in my life, and my voice went up an octave on the first word. I said, "My name is Toby Wren. I work here. I want to read you 3 lines." And I read them the talking points. In Sterling's handwriting, projected out over 600 people on rented speakers. Target the seniors first, they anchor the rest. Public over private. They quit faster when the town watches. No paper. Nothing in writing to any employee. Then I told them what I heard through a 2-inch gap in an office door on August 21st. The sale, Antler Ridge. The lodge and the road and the gate. 9 men with 40 years and no contracts. Make it unpleasant. You're good at that, I said. Everything that happened to us this summer was billed to somebody. It had a purpose. You all just watched the last 5 minutes of it. Nobody made a sound while I read. Bill Teague was standing up in the 3rd row with his hat off, and Garrett Poole, in his folding chair, with his good boots in the cut hay, closed his folder. I watched him do it. He closed the folder, and he put it under his arm, and he stood up, and he walked to his rental car through 600 people who all knew exactly who he was by then. And not one person got out of his way, and not one person touched him. He was gone before the pie table sold out. The written withdrawal came Tuesday. 1 page. 2 sentences. Antler Ridge Outdoor Holdings terminated the letter of intent and cited, in words I will be quoting for the rest of my life, an unacceptable divergence between the represented condition of the operation and the observed condition of the operation. Mr. Ames drove out from the city Wednesday. First time on the property in 4 years. He got there at 11 in the morning, and the certified letter from the County Labor Board had been delivered to that ranch office at 2 o'clock the previous afternoon. The second one. The one with the deadline on it. He read it standing up in his own office, with his keys still in his hand. Then he asked where Wendell was, and somebody told him. North Tank, checking water, and Mr. Ames walked out across his own ground in his city shoes to go find a farmhand. I don't know what was said. Nobody does. It took 18 minutes, and Wendell never told a soul, and I asked him twice, and the second time he said, "Toby," in a certain way, and I never asked again. Here's what came out of it. The sale is dead, not postponed. Dead. The ground is still a working ranch, and there is no lodge, and no gate, and no road down the creek, and the pink survey ribbons went into a burn barrel in October, and I lit it. Mr. Ames sold his condo in the city instead. That's a matter of public record, and anybody can look it up. Every hour that had been docked off 11 people got paid back with interest, calculated by the county, in a check that had to be signed personally. The crew is intact. All of them. Bilteague, Polk, Deaky, Marisol, Cody Pruitt on weekends during the school year. They offered Wendell Harp the foreman's job. He turned it down inside of 10 seconds, he said. My back's got about 2 years of decisions left in it, and none of them ought to be about payroll. Then he named Marisol Vega, and Mr. Ames said, Who? And Wendell said, The woman who's been running this place since June. You just haven't been paying her for it. She's had that job 4 years now. The herd's up 11%. She keeps the ledger in the same handwriting he taught her, and Sterling Ames went north. That's not a punishment I got to watch, so I'll give it to you straight and short. His uncle didn't press anything. The family didn't disown him. Nothing dramatic. He just had no version of his life left in this county. The exhibition win was gone. The gym in the city stopped answering. The video of an old man walking got taken down by whoever had shared it, and a different 40 seconds went up in its place, filmed on about 200 phones. And that one is still online. He teaches now, a community dojo about 6 hours north. Kids Basics, Tuesday and Thursday, under a head instructor who supervises the room. I looked it up once, and I want to say the true thing about it, instead of the mean thing. He's teaching 8-year-olds how to fall down safely. That is honest, useful work. It might be the first honest work of his life, and I hope he keeps it. And I hope he's good at it. And if he ever wants to know where he learned that a person's can be put on the ground without being ruined, he can go ahead and think about who showed him. And Wendell Harp? Wendell Harp was at the North Tank at 6 the next morning. That's it. That's the whole aftermath for the man everybody wanted to make a hero. 6 a.m., wire cutters in his back pocket, the milky-eyed dog walking about 4 feet behind him. He never once mentioned that Saturday. Not one time. Not at the shop, not at the diner, not at Dooley's register, when the whole store went quiet the first time he came back in. A reporter from the city called twice. He told her he had cattle. He taught me lap joints that October, exactly like he said he would. I welded 11 gates that winter, and every one of them is still hanging. He died in March of the year before last. In his sleep, in that bunkhouse room, 69 years old, and the dog was on the floor beside the bed. And that dog would not leave that room for 2 days. There were 300 people at the funeral. 11 of them drove in from North Carolina. I did not recognize a single one of those 11 men, and every one of them shook my hand, and every one of them said the same word when they got to the front of the church and stood over him. They said, "Sir." So here's my ask, and it's the only reason I've told you any of this. Every feed store in this country has a Wendell Harp standing in line. Every warehouse floor, every night shift, every diner at 6 in the morning with a hat on the seat beside him, some slow old man with bad knees and a cheap coffee that a kid in new sneakers thinks is furniture. Look at the oldest hands in the room tonight. Then go ask them one question about where they used to work, and then be quiet long enough for them to answer it. Because a loud man tells you everything he can do. A dangerous man tells you nothing, and waters the dog first. That's the whole thing. That's all 40 years of him in one sentence. Now I've got a question I've never been able to settle, and I'm handing it to you honestly, because I've been on both sides of it, and I've lost the argument to myself about 100 times. Wendell knew about the sale for weeks and said nothing while the crew sweated it out, took the hour cuts, took the humiliation, and thought it was their own fault. He used that time to teach them every skill they'd need to be hired anywhere in the county. Was training them quietly the greater gift, or did they deserve the truth in plain words, right then, and the chance to fight for themselves? Tell us below. If this story hit you, subscribe now. Share it with someone who respects quiet strength, and tell us in the comments which moment hit you the hardest. We will see you for the next story. It is already waiting.